When we study the Korean War, the focus often falls on the front lines, the political stalemates, or the massive troop movements. Yet, one of the most overlooked realities of that conflict is how logistics and resource management directly shape survival and combat effectiveness. Entire battalions were immobilized, not because of enemy action, but because of inadequate supply chains, exposure to harsh terrain, and simple mismanagement of materials. Units suffered from equipment decay, frozen supplies, and improperly maintained shelters, all of which reduced combat readiness in ways that often go unmentioned in popular accounts. Understanding these overlooked aspects is critical, not only for historians, but for anyone interested in survival, endurance, and the practical realities of warfare. It is in this context, where resourcefulness and material mastery determine survival, that we can appreciate lessons from much earlier times. If you are here for detailed, historically grounded insight that goes beyond surface-level storytelling, subscribe now, because this channel is dedicated to uncovering the knowledge and strategies that history quietly preserves. The Vikings treated wood as a living material, not an inert building block. The lesson begins with timber. Modern construction tends to treat wood as a simple material, cut it, shape it, and coat it with chemicals, then leave it to fate. Vikings approached wood differently. They observed how moisture, temperature, and seasonal cycles affected the structural integrity of timber over years, not months. Archaeological evidence from sites across Scandinavia demonstrates that Viking builders carefully stored planks above ground, supported to allow airflow, preventing moisture accumulation that leads to rot. Their method was empirical. Heartwood from slow-growing trees was prioritized for structural components because of its density and natural resistance to decay. Trees were harvested in winter when sap levels were low, reducing vulnerability to fungal growth. These details, seemingly minor, were the difference between longhouses standing for generations and structures collapsing within a decade. Now, the Vikings also harnessed natural chemicals to protect their timber. Tar, which they derived from pine and birch, was applied to planks to create a water-resistant barrier and, to inhibit fungal growth. This wasn't just a superficial coating. Tar actually penetrated the wood fibers, interacting with the resin-rich heartwood to produce, truly remarkable longevity. Archaeological evidence shows that longships like the Gokstad and Oseberg vessels were repeatedly coated with tar and maintained over decades, which enabled them to survive saltwater immersion and those harsh northern winters. Salt was another preservation agent. Timber intended for marine or coastal use was sometimes exposed to brine, which, interestingly, limited microbial decay without damaging the structural integrity. The Vikings' knowledge of chemical interactions didn't come from laboratories, but rather from careful observation, trial, and adjustment, principles that honestly remain valid today for anyone seeking durable wood construction. Modern practices often fail simply because they ignore natural processes. Today's builders prioritize speed, uniformity, and cost. Wood is kiln-dried and chemically treated, then stored in conditions that, unfortunately, can trap moisture or allow repeated wetting and drying. Even pressure-treated lumber can succumb to rot if ventilation is inadequate or water accumulates. The Viking approach, in contrast, emphasizes timing, selection, and the interplay between the environment and the material. This disconnect really highlights a broader lesson. Empirical knowledge honed over centuries can outperform modern shortcuts when applied with understanding. The principle is simple. Anticipate how wood behaves over time. Select the right species, cut at the optimal season, store properly, and apply protective treatments that work with the wood's natural chemistry. These are not exotic instructions. They are a framework of careful observation and disciplined execution, the same framework that allowed Viking communities to endure for centuries. Longhouses and longships provide insight into applied knowledge. Examining Viking structures clarifies how this knowledge was implemented. Longhouses relied on massive beams, carefully selected for density and resistance to decay. The combination of heartwood selection, seasonal felling, and proper airflow ensured durability. Shipbuilding intensified these requirements. Longship planks were bent, overlapped, and tarred to accommodate shrinkage, expansion, and constant water exposure. Ships such as the Oseberg vessel, preserved in peat bogs, demonstrate that when these techniques were applied consistently, the timber remained functional for decades. What stands out is the integration of observation, environment, and material science. Timber was not simply cut and used, it was studied, prepared, and maintained. The Vikings' practical understanding of wood behavior is comparable to modern material science principles, though derived entirely from experience rather than experimentation in controlled laboratories. Viking timber preservation extends beyond construction into broader survival strategy. In northern climates, failure to store or treat wood properly could compromise boats, homes, and tools, directly affecting a community's ability to endure winter or respond to external threats. For modern survivalists, the principles are strikingly relevant. Anticipate environmental effects on materials, understand their properties, and invest effort up front to ensure long-term durability. Proper timber management in survival contexts, whether for shelters, watercraft, or implements, can be a matter of life or death. This approach also aligns with sustainable living principles. Rather than relying on chemical preservatives with environmental consequences, Vikings leveraged naturally occurring resins, tars, and seasonal timing to extend the life of essential resources. These strategies demonstrate that resourcefulness and environmental awareness are, deeply intertwined in the most enduring human practices. Oral transmission preserved knowledge that could have been lost. One reason these techniques are not widely known is that they were traditionally taught orally, through apprenticeship and observation. Masters instructed novices on felling times, storage methods, and tar application. With the rise of industrialized forestry and chemical treatments, much of this empirical wisdom was marginalized. Many medieval practices survived only in remote shipyards or isolated communities, overlooked by historians who emphasized battles and kings over everyday survival and engineering. Understanding the Viking approach requires not only examining the technical steps, but appreciating the cultural transmission of knowledge. This insight reminds us that much of human ingenuity has historically been preserved in practical skill rather than written record. Applying these lessons in modern contexts is straightforward but requires attention. Reclaiming Viking wisdom in wood preservation involves understanding the principles rather than ritualistically copying procedures. Select dense, slow-growing wood. Harvest during low sap periods. Ensure airflow around all timber during storage. Apply natural preservatives such as tar, resin, or brine. Monitor moisture and adjust conditions as needed. These steps, simple in concept, can dramatically extend the life of timber and outperform some modern treatments over decades. The principle is consistent across time. Attention, observation, and disciplined execution yield results that shortcuts and chemicals alone cannot replicate. Survival, construction, and durability all benefit when humans respect the behavior of their materials rather than imposing artificial shortcuts. Ultimately, the story of Viking wood preservation is a story about foresight, adaptation, and empirical knowledge. It demonstrates that history is full of practical insights, often ignored because they don't fit the popular narrative of conquest and heroism. Lessons about survival, resource management, and material science are embedded in these practices, and they remain relevant today. Understanding how timber was treated, stored, and maintained can inform both historical appreciation and modern applications in construction and survival. For viewers dedicated to serious historical insight, the takeaway is clear. Enduring solutions require observation, planning, and disciplined practice. Vikings did not invent chemicals. They mastered the natural properties of wood to survive and thrive. Recognizing and applying these lessons enriches our understanding of both history and human ingenuity. If this exploration has deepened your appreciation for historical practices and survival knowledge, subscribe to the channel for more in-depth analysis. Share this video with others who value carefully researched historical insight. By learning from these overlooked methods, we honor history and gain practical knowledge that remains relevant today.